The quiet secret. Muna was known throughout the village for her gentle nature and warm smile. She had a gift for weaving baskets, her handiwork admired by everyone who passed through the marketplace. Her life was simple yet fulfilling, made all the better by her marriage to Kofi, a charming trader with a silver tongue and a knack for striking good deals. Kofi was respected by the elders and loved by the youth, who looked up to him for guidance. Together, they seemed like the perfect couple, their bond unshakable in the eyes of the villagers. But Muna carried a secret, one that no one, not even Kofi, knew. Muna had been deaf since birth. She had learned to read lips and interpret expressions, mastering the silent language of the world around her. However, a few years ago, she had quietly acquired a small, discreet hearing aid, hidden beneath her braided hair. It allowed her to catch glimpses of the sounds she had never fully experienced. Yet, she never told Kofi about it. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, she adored him, but she feared he might see her differently. She didn't want pity or to be treated as fragile. She wanted their marriage to remain as it was, a partnership built on love and mutual respect. So, she kept her hearing aid a secret, believing it was a small omission that wouldn't hurt anyone. Their life together appeared perfect. Kofi would often come home from the marketplace with gifts for her, a new shawl, fresh spices, or stories of his trading adventures. He would call her my queen, and Muna would blush, waving him off with a laugh. To anyone watching, their love was a shining example in the village. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across their modest home, Muna sat by the fire, threading dried palm leaves for a new basket. Kofi had just returned from the market, his voice animated as he recounted his day. His words filled the small space, but Muna wasn't paying attention to his story. Her thoughts were elsewhere. For weeks, she had been using her hearing aid more frequently, curious about the sounds of the world around her. She had begun to pick up faint whispers, the rustling of leaves, distant conversations from the road, and even the soft buzz of the marketplace from their home. It was as if a new world had opened to her. That evening, as Kofi busied himself with tidying his wares, Muna adjusted the volume on her hearing aid, careful not to draw attention. She was startled when she picked up faint voices coming from just outside their window. "Does she know?" one voice whispered, low and tense. "No, she suspects nothing," came another voice, firm and unmistakable. It was Kofi's. Muna froze, her fingers hot in midweave. Her heart raced as she strained to catch more of the conversation, but the voices grew faint, lost to the hum of the crickets outside. She tried to piece together what little she had heard, but it made no sense. What could Kofi be hiding? Who was he speaking to? When Kofi returned to the room, his usual smile in place, Muna forced herself to smile back, pretending she hadn't heard anything. But her mind was spinning, the faint whispers replaying over and over. As the night stretched on, Muna sat quietly by the fire, her thoughts restless. What was Kofi keeping from her? And why did it feel like her hidden hearing aid had just uncovered something she was never meant to know? The perfect life she thought they shared now felt different, fragile, uncertain. The unease settled in her chest like a heavy stone, but she pushed it aside, telling herself it might have been a misunderstanding. Yet deep down, Muna knew that something was not right. Whispers in the dark. Muna couldn't shake the unease that settled in her chest after overhearing Kofi's whispered words. She replayed the conversation in her mind, analyzing every syllable and trying to convince herself it was nothing. Perhaps she had misunderstood. The hearing aid sometimes amplified faint sounds, distorting them slightly. But even as she reassured herself, the doubt lingered. Kofi, as usual, was his charming self, laughing with the neighbors and doting on Muna in public. Yet, she couldn't ignore the subtle changes in his behavior. He had started coming home later than usual, offering vague explanations about business at the market or helping a friend. His excuses seemed plausible, but they were always just enough to deflect her curiosity. Late one evening, Muna sat in their quiet home, her hands busy weaving a mat while her mind soared with unanswered questions. Kofi had left hours earlier, saying he needed to check on a shipment arriving from the nearby town. The sun had long since set, and the sounds of the village were muffled by the night stillness. Curious and uneasy, Muna adjusted the volume on her hearing aid, listening to the faint sounds from the world beyond their walls. At first, all she heard was the rustling of palm leaves and the distant croak of frogs. But then, her ears caught something, a faint, hurried conversation drifting from the direction of the marketplace. "You need to be careful," said a voice, sharp and urgent. "He won't suspect a thing," another voice replied, low and calm. Muna's breath caught. She leaned closer to the window, straining to hear more. "The woman, what if she finds out?" the first voice asked. "She doesn't know." "She won't," the second voice assured. Muna's heart raced. Was the woman they spoke of her? And what didn't they want her to know? When Kofi returned home later that night, he seemed distracted, his usual warmth replaced by a strange tension. He kissed Muna's cheek and mumbled something about a long day. She nodded and smiled, as she always did, but her mind was racing. She longed to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if she accused him of something innocent and shattered the trust they'd built? The following nights brought more whispers. Each time, Muna used her hearing aid to eavesdrop on faint conversations between Kofi and others. The words she caught painted a picture she didn't want to believe, mentions of deaths, secret transactions, and plans she couldn't fully piece together. The tension in their home grew thick, though Kofi seemed blissfully unaware of her suspicions. Muna struggled to act normal, but the weight of what she overheard was a constant burden. She told herself to wait, to gather more information before taking action. Yet, the more she learned, the more fearful she became of the man she thought she knew. One night, as Muna sat silently in their small living room, a knock echoed at the door. The sound startled her, visitors at this hour were rare. She adjusted her hearing aid, listening closely as Kofi went to answer. The door creaked open, and low voices filtered into the room. Muna heard Kofi greet the visitor with familiarity. "Come in. Let's talk inside," he said, his tone serious. The visitor's voice was low and rough. "We don't have much time. The shipment's already on its way." Muna's heart pounded as she pressed herself into the shadows, listening intently. The stranger's words hinted at something secretive, something dangerous. Kofi led the visitor into the back room, closing the door behind them. Muna was left in the dimly lit living room, her mind racing with questions. Who was the stranger? What shipment were they discussing? And why did Kofi feel the need to hide it from her? The whispers in the dark had grown louder, more ominous, and Muna knew she was on the brink of uncovering something that could change everything. The hidden truth. Muna sat in the corner of the dimly lit living room, her heart pounding as muffled voices seeped through the door of the back room. She adjusted the volume on her hearing aid, amplifying the sounds just enough to make out what was being said. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the chair, her breath shallow with dread. Inside the back room, Kofi's voice was calm but calculated. The shipment will arrive at dawn. The officials at the border have already been bribed, so there won't be any problems. All we need to do is ensure the goods are offloaded before anyone gets suspicious. The visitor, whose voice was deep and raspy, replied, "And the payment? How do we move the money without leaving a trail?" Kofi chuckled lightly. "That's the beauty of it. Everything's under my wife's name. If anyone starts asking questions, it will lead back to her, not me. No one would suspect a simple village woman." Muna's blood ran cold. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she had just heard. Kofi had been using her name, her identity, to cover his illegal dealings. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, had not only betrayed her but also put her in danger. The conversation continued, each word cutting deeper into Muna's heart. The goods are rare artifacts, Kofi explained. They'll fetch a fortune in the city. Once this deal goes through, we'll be set for life. And what about your wife? The visitor asked, his tone cautious. She doesn't know a thing, Kofi replied dismissively. She's too naive, too trusting. Even if she did find out, what could she do? Tears welled in Muna's eyes, but she blinked them away, forcing herself to stay composed. She felt a surge of anger and heartbreak, but also a determination she hadn't known she possessed. She couldn't let Kofi get away with this, not only for her own sake but for the innocent people his schemes might harm. Muna's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, hidden beneath the folds of her shawl. She had never used the voice recording function before, but now, she quickly navigated to it, pressing the record button. The faint red light blinked as she held the phone close to the door, capturing every word of their conversation. Inside, Kofi and the visitor continued to plot, unaware that Muna was listening. When the shipment arrives, we'll move it through the Western Trail, Kofi said. It's secluded, and no one will think to look there. By the time anyone notices, we'll be long gone. Muna's chest tightened. The Western Trail was near the school where children from the village often played. The thought of Kofi's schemes endangering innocent lives filled her with a mix of fear and fury. The visitor's voice lowered, almost to a whisper. If anyone gets in the way, you know what we have to do. Kofi hesitated before replying, let's just hope it doesn't come to that. Muna clutched the phone tightly, her resolve hardening. She knew she couldn't confront Kofi directly, not yet. He was dangerous, and she needed a plan. But one thing was clear, the man she had loved and built a life with was not the man she thought he was. As the conversation in the back room wrapped up, Muna quickly stopped the recording and slipped the phone into her shawl. Her heart raced as she prepared to act normal, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. When Kofi and the visitor emerged, she greeted them with a polite smile, her face betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. Kofi kissed her on the cheek and told her the visitor was a business associate. Muna nodded, playing the role of the oblivious wife. But deep inside, she knew the truth. Her perfect life had been a lie, and now, she had the evidence to prove it. A dangerous revelation. The next morning, Muna woke with a heavy heart, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. She knew she couldn't handle this alone. After ensuring Kofi had left for the marketplace, she slipped out of the house and made her way to Auntie Ya's home. Auntie Ya was the village's matriarch, a woman of wisdom who had seen many seasons and guided countless families through times of trouble. Muna trusted her completely. When she arrived, she found Auntie Ya tending to her garden, her wrinkled hands deftly pulling weeds from the rich soil. Auntie, Muna began, her voice trembling, I need your help. There's something I need to tell you, but it must stay between us. Auntie Ya looked up, her sharp eyes immediately sensing the seriousness of the situation. Come, child, she said, gesturing for Muna to sit on the wooden bench beneath a mango tree. Tell me what troubles you. Muna hesitated, then pulled out her phone and played the recording. Auntie Ya listened in silence, her face growing graver with each passing second. When the recording ended, she let out a heavy sigh. This is serious, Muna, Auntie Ya said. Kofi is not only betraying you but putting the entire village at risk. If his actions are discovered, it could bring shame and danger to all of us. Muna's eyes filled with tears. What should I do, Auntie? I don't know if I can confront him. He's not the man I thought he was. Auntie Ya placed a comforting hand on Muna's shoulder. You must act carefully, child. Men like Kofi, when cornered, can become desperate and dangerous. Gather more evidence if you can, but do not let him suspect you know. When the time is right, we will take this to the village chief. Muna nodded, grateful for Auntie Ya's guidance. She promised to keep calm and cautious, but her resolve was tested as the days went by. Kofi's behavior began to change. He noticed Muna's distance, her occasional distraction during their conversations. He started asking questions, small ones at first. Are you feeling well, Muna? You've been quiet lately, he said one evening. I'm fine, Kofi, she replied, forcing a smile. Just tired from weaving all day. But Kofi wasn't convinced. His glances grew sharper, his tone more probing. Muna could feel his suspicion building, and she knew she had to be even more careful. One night, while Kofi was in the back room sorting through his goods, Muna adjusted her hearing aid to eavesdrop on his conversation with another visitor. She's been acting strange, Kofi muttered. I don't trust her silence. The visitor's voice was calm. Do you think she knows? Kofi hesitated. I can't be sure. But it doesn't matter. Once the shipment goes through, I'm leaving the village. She'll stay behind to deal with the mess. Muna's heart shattered anew. Not only had Kofi betrayed her, but he also planned to abandon her to face the consequences of his crimes. Her love for him was now completely overshadowed by fear and anger. Muna wrestled with a moral dilemma. If she exposed Kofi, it would mean the end of their life together and possibly put herself in harm's way. But if she stayed silent, she would be complicit in his actions and left to bear the weight of his betrayal alone. The decision wasn't easy, but Muna knew she couldn't allow Kofi to continue his deceit. She had to protect herself, the village, and the innocent lives he threatened to destroy. Late that night, when Kofi was sound asleep, Muna sent an anonymous message to the village chief. She carefully worded it to protect her identity but included the details of Kofi's plans, the shipment, and the route he intended to take. The message read: The Western Trail will be used to smuggle stolen goods at dawn. Be ready. A village man is leading this operation and putting our community at risk. Act swiftly before it's too late. Muna hit send, her hands trembling. She knew she had just crossed a line she could never return from, but deep inside, she felt a small flicker of relief. As the night stretched on, Muna lay awake, listening to the sound of Kofi's steady breathing beside her. She didn't know what would come next, but she was prepared to face the truth, no matter the cost, confrontation and betrayal. The morning air was still and heavy, a quiet tension blanketing the village. Muna had barely slept the night before, her mind swelling with thoughts of what was to come. She had met secretly with the village chief at dawn, explaining everything she knew and sharing the recording she had made. The chief, a stern but fair man, assured her that they would act swiftly to protect the village and bring Kofi and his accomplices to justice. By midday, the plan was in motion. The chief and his trusted guards prepared an ambush along the Western Trail, where Kofi and his partners intended to move the smuggled goods. Muna's heart pounded as she returned home, knowing she had done her part but still feeling the weight of what lay ahead. Kofi arrived home that evening with a forced smile, his usual charm barely masking the nervous energy radiating from him. He seemed distracted, pacing the small living room and checking the clock repeatedly. Muna watched him silently, her expression neutral, but inside, she was bracing herself for what she knew was coming. Finally, Kofi stopped pacing and turned to her. His eyes were sharp, filled with suspicion. Muna, he began, his voice low and measured, you've been acting strange lately. Quiet. Distant. Is there something you want to tell me? Muna met his gaze, her heart pounding but her face calm. I could ask you the same, Kofi, she replied, her voice steady. Kofi's jaw tightened. What are you talking about? Muna stood, her hands trembling but her resolve firm. I know, Kofi. I've heard everything. Your plans, the smuggling, the lies. I know what you've been doing, and I have proof. His face darkened, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Then, he took a step closer, his voice rising. You've been spying on me. Mona stood her ground, refusing to back down. I didn't have to spy, Kofi. You made the mistake of underestimating me. My hearing aid, something you didn't even know I had, revealed everything. Kofi's expression shifted, a mix of anger and disbelief. You don't understand, Muna. I did this for us, for our future. This village is too small for dreams like mine. I had no choice. Tears filled Muna's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Don't lie to me, Kofi. You didn't do this for us. You used me, my name, my trust, and you put the entire village at risk. You betrayed me in every way possible. Kofi's hands clenched into fists at his sides. And what are you going to do about it? Go to the chief? Ruin me? Muna lifted her chin, her voice steady and unwavering. It's already done, Kofi. The chief knows everything. They're waiting for you and your accomplices on the Western Trail. For a moment, Kofi was frozen, his face a mask of shock. Then, as the weight of her words sank in, he turned and bolted for the door. The Western Trail was quiet, save for the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Kofi and his partners arrived at the meeting point, their cart laden with crates of smuggled goods. They exchanged nervous glances, unaware of the trap that had been set. The village guards, hidden in the shadows, waited for the right moment. When Kofi and his accomplices began unloading the crates, the chief gave the signal. Stop right there, his voice boomed, cutting through the stillness. The guards emerged, surrounding the group with spears and clubs at the ready. Kofi's face went pale as he realized they had been caught. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, trying to regain his composure. The chief stepped forward, his gaze stern. We know everything, Kofi. Your plans, your crimes, and your betrayal of this village. It's over. Kofi and his accomplices were quickly subdued and tied up. As they were loaded into the guard's wagon, Kofi's eyes scanned the crowd of villagers who had gathered, searching for Mona. He spotted her standing at the edge of the clearing, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without a word, Mona turned and walked away. As the wagon carrying Kofi disappeared into the distance, Mona stood silently beneath a towering baobab tree. A mix of emotions swirled within her, relief that the danger was over, sadness for the love she had lost, and a newfound strength she hadn't known she possessed. The man she had once trusted with her heart had betrayed her, but she had found the courage to stand up for herself and protect her village. Mona wiped a single tear from her cheek and turned toward the path that led back to the village. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it, one step at a time. New beginnings. The sun rose slowly over the village, casting golden light on the familiar thatched roofs and dusty paths. Mona sat beneath the baobab tree where she had stood the night before, the events of the past few days replaying in her mind. She traced her fingers over the smooth surface of her hearing aid, thinking of how something so small had revealed a truth so devastating, and yet, so liberating. For years, she had believed in the life she and Kofi had built, blind to the cracks beneath the surface. His betrayal had shattered her world, but it had also revealed her strength. She had faced the truth, no matter how painful, and acted to protect herself and the village. The news of Kofi's arrest spread quickly, and the villagers gathered at Auntie Ya's home to offer their support to Mona. Women brought baskets of food and handmade shawls, while the men shared words of encouragement. You were brave, Mona, said one of the elders. Many would have turned a blind eye, but you chose to do what was right. Auntie Ya, ever the guiding force in Muna's life, placed a comforting arm around her shoulders. "You have shown the strength of a lioness, child," she said with pride. "Now, it is time to rebuild, to move forward." Inspired by Auntie Ya's words, Muna began to take small but meaningful steps toward a new life. She sold the house she and Kofi had shared and moved to a smaller, cozier home closer to the marketplace. There, she expanded her weaving business, creating vibrant baskets and mats that quickly became sought after in neighboring villages. Her work gave her purpose, but it was the silence she once feared that now became her greatest source of strength. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Muna removed her hearing aid. The quiet wrapped around her like a comforting blanket, shielding her from the chaos of the world. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply and letting the stillness fill her with a sense of peace. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like a barrier, it felt like freedom. Weeks turned into months, and Muna flourished in her independence. She became a symbol of resilience and courage in the village, her story inspiring others to face their own fears and challenges. One day, as she wove a colorful basket beneath the baobab tree, a young girl approached her shyly. "Muna," the girl said, holding up a poorly woven mat, "can you teach me how to make it better?" Muna smiled warmly and patted the ground beside her. "Of course, my dear. Let's start with the basics." As she guided the girl's hands, Muna felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined, but it had led her to a place of clarity and purpose. That evening, as the stars filled the sky, Muna walked through the village, her head held high. She passed the marketplace, where her baskets were proudly displayed, and waved to the villagers who greeted her with smiles and kind words. The road ahead was hers to walk, free from deception and filled with endless possibilities. Muna had found her strength, her voice, and her peace. And as she disappeared into the night, the sound of her steady footsteps echoed in her heart, a reminder of the journey she had taken and the future she was ready to embrace.